Hey guys, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Yes, we are back on the couch because we are doing a massive book haul. I've gone crazy. Quarantine has gotten to me and I've bought a ton of books. So I decided to separate this out into genres as I thought that might be easier. But today we're going to be doing all of the classics that I've bought and gotten in recent months. So I actually got to go to the used bookstore last week. I got to carry some books and get them out of my house that I wanted to unhaul, which was wonderful. And so while I was there waiting for credit, I got to browse a little. And I'm really pleased to say that in my used bookstore, I felt very safe. I felt like everybody was listening to the mask mandate and everybody kept their distance. I just genuinely felt like it was a great experience to go there. Not all of these are from that. I have ordered things from thrift books. I have ordered things from Book Depository. Really, I just have a problem. I recognize that I have a problem, and I recognize that I specifically have a problem buying classic books. And I'm still gonna buy more because, you know what? Victober's coming up, y'all. And I really need to be thinking about my TBR for that, my tentative TBR. So let's just get right into these. I have a good mix here. There's a lot of ancient classics in this haul. I mean, a lot of ancient classics and some more modern classics, mostly ancient classics. I think a few Victorian, but they might all be Charles Dickens because I'm on a bit of a kick. So the first thing I picked up is this little edition of the Bronte poetry. I really enjoy this. I got this from Thrift Books and it's just so darling. And it has a nice little ribbon tab in it. But this includes some poems from Branwell as well as Charlotte, Emily, and Anne. So that's really why I picked it up, because I wanted this for my Bronte project. I've been reading a poem here and there and it is separated into the different siblings, so I'm still in Charlotte's section. I like her poetry, but I feel like I'm really gonna connect with Emily's when I get there, so I'm really excited about this. Next, one of the first things that I picked up at the used bookstore is the Alexiad by Anna Komnena, and so this is just a fantastic find. I think this has actually gone out of print, it's gone out of publication. Maybe they have a new updated Penguin Black Spine of this, but I haven't seen one anywhere. This is a really incredible source from the Middle Ages. So Anna Komnena was the daughter of Alexius, who was the Roman or Byzantine emperor during the First Crusade. And so he essentially made the call to the West and said, please help us. Pope Urban decided to call for the crusade. She is his daughter, and she was always kind of raised with the idea that she was going to be very important politically. She was going to marry the heir to the throne, and she would be empress. Unfortunately for her, that engagement was broken off, and her brother inherited the throne. And so throughout much of her life, she tried to kill him. But this is her writing basically a sort of semi-biography of her father and her father's time. So this is a really important historical source for the First Crusade. And it's also one of the most important medieval sources we have that was written by a woman. This is a really outstanding piece of history. I have never read it, so I am really looking forward to getting into this. I am a little bit obsessed with Byzantium right now, so I think I'll probably pick this up pretty soon. I also picked up Valperga by Mary Shelley because I'm obsessed with her, and I have only ever talked about Mary Shelley and the Romantics for the past month and a half. So I ordered this because this is her book that takes place in medieval Italy. It is focusing on a historical family that she became fascinated by when she and Percy Shelley were traveling and living in Italy. And I've had my eye on this for a long time, ever since I knew that she wrote this. And I didn't know that they actually published any editions of it. So I think technically, even though I got this off of Thrift Books, I think this is technically from a publisher that kind of prints on demand. I'm really interested in this. I've heard it's really great, but I've also heard it's one that doesn't translate well to the modern reader. A lot of modern readers have trouble with it, even though it was actually fairly well received in her own lifetime. People really respected the research that she put into it. I am really looking forward to this, and I will likely pick this up pretty soon since I'm still in a big romantic mood. Going alongside that, I picked up Zofloya by Charlotte Dacre, and this is a really interesting book because it also takes place in Italy, but I think this is more Renaissance Italy setting, and it focuses on an anti-heroine. Charlotte Dacre was writing at the same time as Anne Radcliffe and Jane Austen, and that kind of contingent, so I wanted to kind of pick this up for Jane Austen July. You will find out at the end of the month, if you haven't found out already. My Jane Austen July has gone off the rails because I'm in the middle of a reading slump. But this sounds very interesting because I think it's also playing with our ideas about gender and the role in society that women should occupy. I've heard mixed things about this, but a lot of people say if you like Gothic literature, and I do, that you will really like this. I also picked up the tales of Glasstown, Angria, and Gondal by the Brontes. So this is a really comprehensive edition from the Oxford World Classics. I think this is still just selections from their juvenilia, but this seemed to include a little bit of everything from the Bronte juvenilia, so I really wanted this edition, again, for my Bronte project that I'm way behind on. I think this will be a fascinating one to read in pieces, just a little bit here and there. I think I'm really going to enjoy this, given how much I've enjoyed the Brontes in the past. I'm really curious to see how they got their start. I've heard these are really fantastical stories, and they take place in almost fantasy realms in our own world. But I've also heard that these early writings are very imperialist, if that's the right word, very pro-colonialism, and I don't know how I'll feel about that. I'm very curious about it, and I'm interested to see how I will feel when I get into this. Next, I picked up this little bind-up of Aeschylus because it included Prometheus Bound, which I wanted to read because of Percy Shelley writing Prometheus Unbound. This is not the edition I ordered. That's one thing I will say for thrift books, is that very rarely do you get the edition that you picked out, or do you get maybe what you think the condition will be. I've never found that their condition notes are inaccurate. I think when I pay for a good book, good is all I get. Usable, acceptable is all I get. I don't think that their condition notes are wrong, but they do tend to say, oh, you're gonna get the nice Penguin Black Spine editions, and then they send you the little paperback they have from the 70s, because technically it is a Penguin Black Spine. But this also includes the Suppliants, Seven Against Thebes, and the Persians. The Suppliants is one that I'm also very curious about, because this is essentially all that we have of Aeschylus remaining, other than the Oresteia, which is his trilogy of plays. That is the only remaining trilogy of ancient Greek plays that we have, sadly enough. So I'm interested to complete him. I was a little bit disappointed in Prometheus Bound. So I'm interested to come back to this. A lot of these are very, very short plays, so they can be pushed through in an afternoon or so. I think it'll be kind of depressing to finish him though, given how much I really loved the Oresteia, but I really felt like Prometheus Bound was a little bit lackluster. So I hope that that's not a theme with the rest of Aeschylus's works. Next, we have another that is technically not the cover I ordered or the edition that I ordered, but this doesn't bother me, because when they're thicker like this, these little paperbacks are actually very, very nice, especially because you don't feel bad about messing them up or taking notes in them. But this is Euripides, Orestes, and some other plays. I'll tell you what else is in here. So I got this for Orestes, but it also has the Children of Heracles, Andromache, the Suppliant Women, and the Phoenician Women. So I think this is going to be really interesting. I love Euripides. Euripides has, I think, my favorite retelling of Electra, and so Orestes is one that I'm really interested in. In fact, I may have read it, but it's been so long ago that it would be like reading it for the first time. So I'm really excited that I got to pick this up. I do wish it was the edition that I really wanted, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, and when things are as cheap as they are on thrift books, I really don't get mad, because I don't feel like I have a right to get mad when things are that cheap. Then we have another Mary Shelley. So this is Frankenstein, which I have read. But I believe, if I am not mistaken, that the version of Frankenstein that I read was her 1831 text. And this is the 1818 edition. If you don't know anything about Mary Shelley and her rather complicated relationship with the text of Frankenstein, she wrote it to completion, published it in 1818, but the idea started on a night where she was with Lord Byron, her husband Percy Shelley, and another man by the name of Polidori. And it was a dark, stormy night. They were in Switzerland, and Lord Byron says, "Tell me a ghost story." This is what Mary Shelley came up with. She was a teenager at the time, and this really plays with the ideas of Prometheus, kind of playing off of Prometheus Bound. This is also around the time that Percy Shelley wrote Prometheus Unbound, but that didn't come about because of this night. She published this, and Polidori wrote The Vampire, which is essentially the first vampire book ever written. And so she published this. It really did not take off. There were a lot of poor opinions about Frankenstein on its initial publication, but it eventually did take off in the theater realm, where essentially the author of the book gets no money from this, and the theaters can do whatever they want to with it and change things. And what we think of as Frankenstein, you know, the film, the monster who really is a monster, the creature in Frankenstein is very eloquent and intelligent, but the Frankenstein that we think of kind of came about from these early stage shows that Mary Shelley didn't get a penny out of. But later in her life, in 1831, she went back and edited Frankenstein for a new edition to be published. And it seems like when most people study or read Frankenstein, they read that edition of it. And I was completely unaware of this until I read Romantic Outlaws last month, which I haven't shut up about. But I was completely unaware of that, and so I kind of looked back on my experience with Frankenstein and what I remembered of it. I looked up kind of the differences between the texts, and I came to the conclusion that I'm pretty sure I read the 1831 edition, and I rated that 5 stars. But to be frank, she got an opportunity to do something that I don't really think authors should get, which is that she revisited her book and changed everything about it that she really wasn't happy about. But this text is probably so much more electrifying, and that's really something to say because Frankenstein was an utter revelation to me when I read it. But this, to have been written by a teenager, to have been the story that came about when she was in the same house as Lord Byron, I am really, really pumped about this. And I hopefully can remember enough of my experience with the 1831 text to do a comparison side by side and do a video for y'all. And then if you haven't read it, you might can decide which version will work for you. If you're not somebody who becomes obsessed with Frankenstein like I am, I could reread Frankenstein tomorrow. It is just genuinely good. So I'm really looking forward to this. I also picked up at the used bookstore The Rise and Fall of Athens and 9 Greek Lives by Plutarch. I've read some Plutarch before, but I have never read his Greek Lives, if I'm not mistaken. I really wanted some more of his Roman history, but beggars can't be choosers. They had this at the used bookstore, so I picked it up. If you're curious, the 9 Greek lives that he's going to cover are Theseus, Solon, Themistocles, Aristides, Cimon, Pericles, Nicias, Alcibiades, and Lysander. And so a lot of these are some really famous names from ancient Athens, and some of them are also semi-mythical. I really like Plutarch, and I like the way he writes. Some people don't like him, but I really do. So I'm looking forward to this, even if I have read it. Again, it's been so long that I think it's time I revisit it. I also picked up Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson because I think it's time. I think it's time that I finally read this. I've heard so much about it, and y'all know I really love Pirates of the Caribbean, but I have never found a book that really captured the feeling that watching Pirates of the Caribbean gives me. And so often pirate books really, really disappoint me. So in many ways, I haven't picked up Treasure Island in the past because of that. I think there's a lot riding on it. I think I have a lot of expectations for it that it probably can't live up to. And it's also very short. It's a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. But I really think I'm going to have a fun time with this. I believe this is Victorian. I believe this was published in the Victorian era, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check. Okay, yes. So maybe I will save this for Victober. I might save this for Victober. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Next, I picked up Aristophanes' Lysistrata and other plays. The Lysistrata is a very humorous ancient Greek play, and it's one of the last ancient Greek plays that I have alongside a couple of the Euripides and the Aeschyluses. So I am apprehensive about this because historically the comedies don't work for me, and that goes for anything, any kind of drama. I don't care if it's Shakespeare or if it's the ancient Greeks. Comedy doesn't work as well for me as tragedy does. So I think I'm probably going to be pretty hard on this, but I'm also looking forward to it because I don't think I've ever read any Aristophanes. This might be all that survives of him, to be frank, but I am looking forward to it. I'll tell you what else is included in this collection. The Clouds, the Acharnians, and Lysistrata. So it's basically just 3 plays. I don't think this is all we have of Aristophanes, but this will be my first foray into him. And isn't that a lovely cover? That's really iconically Greek, isn't it? I also picked up Suetonius's The 12 Caesars. I have read this before, and I know I've read it in part, but again, it's been a really long time. I got this for some semi-research for my book, and I just think it's going to be a joy to revisit it. I really do. The introduction is really, really valuable. I've already read the introduction and made some notes. This is going to be really fun. If you've never read Suetonius, I highly recommend you do so. And in fact, if you have never read any ancient literature at all, if you can't recall having read any ancient literature, start with this. I just think you're going to have a lot of fun because Suetonius in the Lives of the 12 Caesars, he's talking about the emperors that you've heard of. If I'm not mistaken, he does include Julius Caesar, who is technically not a Roman emperor. But yes, he does. He does include Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Even if you're not all that familiar with ancient Roman history, you know Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar's names. And this book is like sitting down and gossiping with a friend and hearing all of this crazy stuff that was going on during the early Roman Empire. This is a really, really fun book. Unfortunately, there's a lot of Suetonius that didn't survive, and I grieve that every day. But this is a really, really fun work. I'm hoping to read this in full over the next couple of months while I'm working on my research. So hopefully I can do a little review of it for y'all, but I highly encourage you to pick this up. So really technically why I picked up Suetonius is because technically I really wanted what some people term the sequel to the 12 Caesars, which is the lives of the later Caesars. This was a very interesting text. It's a really complicated background to how it was written. It said there were 6 writers to this and that actually it was one person who pretended to be 6 different people, and then 6 different people also pretended to be one person, and it's really just a whole huge mystery as to who wrote it and whether or not it was written as a joke. Technically, this covers the time period from Hadrian up to Antoninus, Heliogabalus, but I got this because I thought it was going to include Trajan. Trajan is who was of most interest to me right now, but it says that it's included with newly compiled lives of Nerva and Trajan, and I thought that it was going to be like an actual ancient life of Trajan and Nerva. He does this because Nerva and Trajan are not included in Suetonius's 12 Caesars. And it's actually the translator of this work writing those lives himself, which is not of great value to me. I really wanted the ancient perspective on Trajan. So apparently I need to get Ammianus Marcellinus for that. He has apparently a pretty good history of Trajan's reign, and so does Pliny. And I've read Pliny before, but I wanted to try somebody new. So I'm a little bit disappointed with this, and I also don't know whether or not to take it seriously as I get further into it, whether or not they're joking or they're making reference to things that never actually happened, because that's really debated in the introduction to this book. I think it'll at least be kind of funny. So I'm still looking forward to it, but I don't know that I'm going to get out of it what I really wanted to get out of it, if that makes sense. Next, I picked up Dangerous Liaisons by Choderlos de Laclo. If I am pronouncing that correctly, I probably am not. This is one of the big French classics that I have always had a real interest in. This was apparently very scandalous when it was first published, and it remained very scandalous up until the modern day. I think it deals pretty blatantly with an affair, with adultery, and romanticizes it in a really interesting way. I've heard some mixed things about this, I'll be honest, and I don't really know whether or not it will capture me. It was written in 1782. Historically, books written in the 1700s just don't get on with me. I don't know what it is about the time period, but I just don't think I really like the style of writing when people were figuring out the novel structure, the modern novel structure. I think I really struggle with that. So I'm interested in this, but I'm also a little bit apprehensive. I think I will at least enjoy the scandalous side of it. It will probably be jaw-dropping for me. But if you've read this, please let me know your thoughts on it down below, because I've heard some fairly mixed things about it. Next, I picked up at the used bookstore The Odd Women by George Gissing. I tell you what, I know very little about this except that it is a later Victorian work, and I know that Katie from Books and Things and Marissa from Blatantly Bookish love this book. And I really want to watch their videos dissecting it and discussing it in spoilery depth. So I want to read this, but I also want to hold off on it until Victober. I just know that this was written, I think, in the late 1890s, and a lot of people consider it to be a very feminist text, especially to have been written by a man at this period of time. But one of the most interesting things about it that I've heard is that the characters in this book take the tube. They live in London and they take the tube, and that's just wild to me. It's really hard to comprehend that somebody in the 1890s would take the tube. Really, honestly, trying to compute that the subway existed when Queen Victoria did is hard for me. I've heard nothing but good things about this, and especially of its portrayal of female characters in Victorian literature, so I am really looking forward to this one. Next, I picked up this big brick, The Biography of Samuel Johnson by James Boswell, because I wanted to join in with the read-along that Steve Donahue and Mayberry Books are doing. And I am so far behind in that readathon, like it's not even funny, because I am not out of the introduction. And Steve Donahue posted a video the other day, actually, and he says, don't read the introduction to this. Just start reading it. Just start reading the actual biography. Don't get bogged down in that introduction. And I really am still trapped in it. And the readathon is probably almost over. But I think I'm going to enjoy this. I just don't think it's going to be one I can sit and read for a very long amount of time, mostly because it's big. And I've mentioned before, I think I've told y'all that I have some neck problems, and I'm not really supposed to look down at a book. I'm supposed to hold a book eye level with me. This one, that's going to be very difficult to do, but I do think that I'm really going to enjoy it. I wonder if there's a good audiobook version of this that I could listen to alongside reading it, because from what I've read of James Boswell's writing in this, it's really funny. And I think that it could be really well done in an audiobook if you got the right person to do it. But of course, who would narrate an audiobook of this length? I'm still healthily apprehensive of this because, to be frank with you, I know nothing about Dr. Johnson. I know nothing about James Boswell. I genuinely would probably never have heard of this but through Steve's channel or through BookTube in general. So I'm apprehensive of it just genuinely because I don't know who these people are, but who they've come into contact with has been really interesting so far. And I think also there's a lot of classical allusions here, and I live for that. So this was one that I don't think I will read straight through, but I think I will enjoy as I make my way through it. Next, I picked up The Night of Maison-Rouge by Alexandre Dumas because one of y'all recommended this to me and asked whether or not I had read any of the Marie Antoinette books by Alexandre Dumas. And I said, I did not know they existed, but thank you for informing me. And I have since read this, and I loved it. I highly recommend that you find a copy of this. If you like Alexandre Dumas' style, if you like kind of adventure fiction or adventure historical fiction, swashbuckling, genuinely, if you just like Alexandre Dumas' other works, you will like this. I don't know why it's not being talked about. This was so much fun. And essentially it centers around a plot to free Marie Antoinette from prison when she is in the temple and then held at the conciergerie before her execution. And so it follows some really interesting and entertaining characters, and I just highly recommend it. This is one that I have really, really enjoyed, and I hope I can find the other Marie Antoinette books written by Alexandre Dumas in a good translation. This was a lot of fun. Next, I picked up Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. I have talked about this also probably pretty ad nauseum recently, and I loved this. Loved this, loved this. I highly recommend this. This is a Victorian novel that is set in industrial Manchester. It is really, really entertaining. The first half feels a bit like just kind of a quaint love story, but the second half is really action-packed. I just encourage you not to read the back of the book. That's honestly all I can say about it because I did it and I regretted it. But it is really wonderfully written. You can see I tabbed it up because I just find Elizabeth Gaskell's writing very comforting, and it does kind of feel as though somebody is sitting down and telling you a story. I just really enjoyed this, and I also highly recommend it. Next, I picked up Walter Pater's Studies in the History of the Renaissance, which I mostly got for research purposes for my book. This was written in the 1800s by an English historian, and it has gone on to become a classic in its own right, not only a piece of historical scholarship, but this really looks at the Renaissance through a very interesting historical lens, I've heard, and it still rates quite highly for a lot of Renaissance historians as one of the best histories ever written about the time period. His focus in this book is kind of to defend aestheticism, or making things really aesthetic, making things really pretty. I think that had come under fire in his lifetime, and he was really defending that. So I think this is going to be an interesting read. When I get around to it, I will probably read this in little bits here and there, but I think I'm really going to enjoy it. Of course, I picked up the major works of Percy B. Shelley. I won't talk about this long, but just know I'm obsessed with him and I'm a little bit in love with him. This is not everything. This is not his complete works. And in fact, one of his most famous poems is only sampled in part here, which I think is Leon and Cintha. So in some ways, I'm a little bit disappointed in that, but in others, this is just a really valuable compilation of his work. And I just think it's so nicely made. It's so floppy. The notes are really wonderful. There's a lot of notes. Probably the last 100 pages are notes. There you go. And I just find that really valuable. And it also gives Percy Shelley's notes on his own writing, which I think is really great. So I'm really enjoying this. And of course, on the heels of getting this, I got the major works of Lord Byron. This has been an absolute revelation to me, and no, this is not a wrap-up. This is not a review. I should save this until the end of the month. But I have truly been blown away by what I have read from Lord Byron thus far. This is also not everything Byron wrote, but like the Percy B. Shelley major works, it's in chronological order, and it also has a good 100 pages of notes at the end. And it also includes, after each poem, Byron's notes to the cantos or to the poem itself, who he was talking about, why he did it like this. And I just find it really, really interesting. I don't know why I thought I wouldn't like Byron, but I think I've always just thought of him as more of a public figure than actually as a poet, which I guess is pretty interesting and a fairly wrong assumption, because I have to say, and this is gonna sound like I'm cheating on my new boyfriend, Percy B. Shelley, but I think I like Byron better. Yeah. I said it. I'm in the middle of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which is one of his most famous poems, and I love it. It is stunningly beautiful. So I'm looking forward to carrying on with Byron and Shelley. So far, I highly recommend these editions, but I think that their introductions are lacking. I mean, they're literally 10 pages. There's the introduction. For Lord Byron, I just think for almost a complete works of a poet that you could have a little bit longer of an introduction. But I do think that the notes have been really, really well formulated, and they're always relevant. I do sometimes wish there were some definitions of words, like Lord Byron will say something that's a little bit archaic, or use a word that's kind of gone out of fashion, even probably in his own day. So I look that up and I write it down for myself, but I think it would be valuable to have that in this edition. So I really, really love this, and guess what? I think I'm going to place an order, and I think I'm going to get John Keats and Samuel Coleridge and William Wordsworth, and I just think I'm going to be in a happy place with all my romantic poets. I got so lucky at the used bookstore as I found a Norton Critical Edition of Paradise Lost. Y'all don't know how much I have been wanting this. I really want the one of Dante. Like, that's the one I dream of at night. But for $4, and I had credit, excuse me, I got this for free. I just can't believe it. So what makes the Norton Critical Editions really valuable, and there are a lot of them for a wide variety of classics, Victorian, modern, medieval, ancient, they're a really great line. What makes them really valuable is that not only do they include the text with some great commentary, but they include criticism by other writers. So like John Keats, who I was just talking about, really liked Paradise Lost and wrote some commentary on it. This includes commentary from him. It includes William Wordsworth. Samuel Johnson apparently also had some commentary and criticism on it, as did Voltaire. And then it also has things that Milton himself was pulling from writing Paradise Lost, which, if you don't know, Paradise Lost is an epic poem that's basically telling the fall of Lucifer from heaven, and then the temptation and Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And it's a really, really lovely poem. I love Paradise Lost. It's probably in my top 5 favorite books of all time. And it's a really, really important source in English literature and in English history, because a lot of what people think they remember reading about Genesis and the Bible, they think they know that Satan was the serpent in the garden, that Eve took an apple off the tree of knowledge. A lot of that has its basis in Paradise Lost. And in fact, in the Bible, it never says that the serpent is Satan. It's just kind of assumed based on other portions in the Bible that the serpent is Satan. It's also never stated what sort of fruit she ate, but we just assume it was an apple. A lot of that takes its kind of roots from Paradise Lost, because this just became very, very popular. So not only is Paradise Lost in here, but you have selections from the Bible with notes that he was pulling from. So clearly we have the book of Genesis, we have Exodus, Psalms, Isaiah, the Gospels, the Acts. It's a really, really interesting and valuable book to have on hand, and I imagine if you were studying this, that this would be incredibly great to have on hand. I'm really excited that I found it. Okay, y'all, we're apparently about to have a storm, so that's why it's all of a sudden got so dark in here. So I will try to get through the rest of these quickly, because I've been talking for almost an hour. I picked up also The Mystery of Edwin Drood by Charles Dickens. This was Charles Dickens's last novel, and it is unfortunately not completed. I think that we know where he was going with it. I think a lot of people have said you can make some assumptions about how the book would have ended. So I'm really interested in this. I think I'm really gonna like it because it's kind of a murder mystery written by Charles Dickens. It just seems like I'm really gonna enjoy that. But I think it is literally only half finished. I think he had 12 chapters that he wanted to have published, and when he passed away, he had only written 6. So I'm interested in this. I don't know when I will pick it up. I don't know if I should wait until a little bit later in my journey with Charles Dickens to read it, but I am really looking forward to it. I think I'm really gonna love what there is of it, even if the ending is a little bit ambiguous. I also picked up a new edition of The Inferno by Dante. It has been 700 years since The Divine Comedy was published. 2020, 1320 marks a big anniversary, and next year will have been 700 years since Dante died, so I just feel myself going down a hole. I feel like I'm gonna start reading Dante again. But I got this edition because I've been really wanting one that had the Italian on the opposite page, because I thought that might help me know a little bit more Italian and remember more of Italian. So this does. I really am. I'm gonna have to turn on some lights. That didn't make it any better. In fact, it probably made it worse. So sorry about that, y'all, but we're almost done. So I got this mostly because I did want a dual translation of it. This is the translation by Robert Hollander and Jean Hollander, and I have heard nothing about this translation, I have to say. The translation I read was by Mark Musa. I know a lot of people recommend the Alan Mindelbaum translation. So I would also probably like to get my hands on the Mindelbaum translation. I think I'm gonna become one of those people that I always said that I never was gonna be. I don't see how people get multiple editions of the same book. I think that's gonna be me and Dante. I think I'm gonna have 10 different translations of Dante, and I would love, again, the Norton Critical Edition of Dante, and I've seen now that they have a Cambridge Critical Edition of Dante that I also have my eye on for Christmas. So I am looking forward to this. The introduction to this was incendiary. It really made me emotional, and so I'm really looking forward to getting back into this, hopefully very soon. Speaking of Italian classics, I picked up Alessandro Manzoni's The Betrothed. I picked this up because I somehow stumbled across this really interesting list online where it talked about books that Italian students study. So like here in America, we study Shakespeare, we study Nathaniel Hawthorne, F. Scott Fitzgerald, people like that who are big in the public consciousness here in America. And Alessandro Manzoni's Betrothed is the second most studied work in Italy for students. The first being The Divine Comedy by Dante. And I said, that is fascinating to me. So this was written in the 1800s, but it is historical fiction that is set in the 1600s when Milan is enduring the plague. So it doesn't really seem like a good book to pick up right now, but I kind of want to. Maybe it would be therapeutic to read it during this time. I know a lot of people have been picking up plague-related books during the pandemic to kind of be a therapeutic exercise. But I am really, really fascinated by this. If you have read it, please let me know your thoughts down below. It's just wild to think this is the second most studied book in Italy, and I had never heard of it. So I'm really looking forward to this. I also picked up at the used bookstore A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. I really wanted this, and I was tickled to death to see that it was there because I just recently watched Beecham House on PBS. And this is a show that is set in the late 1700s in India, and it's during the British occupation of India and the East India Trading Company. And technically the show is a bit of a romance. It's a bit of a historical swashbuckling type show. You know how it is. Masterpiece classic. You know exactly what you're getting into. But it was so beautifully shot, so beautifully filmed, and I know very little about the British involvement in India. I've heard that this is actually a fairly good representation of Indian culture and Indian characters, but I've also heard that it's offended a lot of people, so I'm interested to see how I'll feel about it. This was published in the 20th century, so I think it's interesting to see how attitudes have changed, and maybe it'll be a good comparison for me to have seen Beecham House and then read something that took place 200 years later. If you've read this, also let me know. I know a lot of people love E.M. Forster, and I have never tried him, so I'm really looking forward to this. Next, at the used bookstore, I also picked up Hard Times by Charles Dickens. On the heels of finishing Mary Barton, I felt like I would be a little bit more comfortable with Hard Times and that I might actually really enjoy it if I went on and picked it up after reading Mary Barton, because Mary Barton was also a very industrial story. And I've heard some people actually really like Hard Times, that it was people who really thought, hey, I'm gonna go into this and hate it, who wound up having a very positive experience with it. So I'm hoping that's gonna be me, but I do feel better about going into this now having read Mary Barton. So I look forward to picking this up fairly soon. I don't wanna forget Mary Barton and then get back into kind of a wariness of this book. I promise you we're almost done. We only have 2 left. So the first of these is Thucydides' The History of the Peloponnesian War. And I have never read this. Given how much I have liked other ancient histories and other Greek histories for that matter, I find it pretty odd that I've never really delved into Thucydides, and this is a huge book. This is much bigger than I thought it was going to be, but I'm really interested in this because this conflict technically ended the Athenian Empire, and the fall of the Athenian Empire is very interesting to me. The fall of a lot of ancient cultures is very interesting to me. So I'm really looking forward to this. This is another iconic Greek cover. It really does look totally Greek. So I'm really looking forward to this. And last but not least, I picked up Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I told you I was on a Charles Dickens kick. Originally, I was really looking forward to Oliver Twist, and I really thought that I would wind up absolutely loving it and that it would probably be one of my favorite Charles Dickenses. But since I have read more of Dickens and since I have seen more people discussing Oliver Twist here on BookTube, I'm more apprehensive of it because a lot of people who are big Dickens fans don't like this and think it's one of the worst books that he wrote. And of course, it's one of the earliest books that he wrote, so maybe that goes without saying. I am torn on it. I hope that I really like it when I get into it, but I think I am kind of lowering my expectations for when I do finally read it. So maybe I will really have positive opinions about it just because I'm going in with such low expectations. But I feel like I know a lot about Oliver Twist. I feel like I know the story. So in some ways that could be very good, in others it could be very bad. I'm tired, so I know y'all are. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know why a storm came up. We're enduring some really hot weather here. It's been, with the heat index almost 110 for like every day for the past week. So I can see why we need the storms, but sorry about the terrible lighting that we had to get into. But if you have read any of these, please let me know your thoughts on them down below. If you have been hauling any classics, I would also love to know that down below as well. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.